on all kinds of things. Statues, museum exhibits, books, a lot of books, and newspapers.
Its entire archive just disappeared from the internet overnight.
The story of Hong Kong's beginnings, colonial past, and the crucial years since 2019's pro-democracy protests
Running street battles between protesters and riot police.
is slowly being rewritten by a government that needs to please the ruling Communist Party in Beijing.
It makes sense. If I were an authoritarian government, I would civilly judge half the people's memories.
I'll be finding out how the people are trying to resist and preserve their history from being lost, even under an increasing climate of fear.
Erasing Hong Kong, Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT.
In an era of information overload, it's hard to gain a deeper understanding of the stories that matter to us all.
China is building the size of the entire world every 2 years.
I'm Claire Graham, and I'll be talking to the BBC's defence correspondent Jonathan Beale to find out how increasing uncertainty and conflict are leading to increased military spend across the world. In the explanation after the news.
BBC News with Neil Harris. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has vowed to crack down further on protesters who accuse him of election fraud. Earlier, the opposition leader Maria Corina Machado addressed a rally in defiance of calls for her arrest. She said she had evidence that Mr. Maduro lost the vote a week ago. There's been violence in towns and cities across England and Northern Ireland as far-right demonstrations spread. More than 80 people were arrested on Saturday. The unrest was sparked by the fatal stabbing of 3 young girls earlier in the week. Nigerian security forces have fired live bullets and tear gas at crowds in Abuja on the third day of the protests over a cost of living crisis. People gathered at the stadium and were blocked by police as they tried to head towards government offices. Israel says it's intercepted dozens of rockets fired into its territory by the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. The United States and Britain have urged their citizens to leave Lebanon quickly, warning that security could rapidly deteriorate. Reports from eastern Congo say M23 rebels have taken control of the town near the Ugandan border. A new ceasefire has been declared that today the group says it did not sign up to that deal. Scientists say the world's biggest iceberg is spinning on the spot in the Southern Ocean. The icy mass known as A23A began drifting north 4 years ago and is expected to break out. The island of St. Lucia in the Caribbean has its first ever Olympic medal, with Julian Alfred sprinting to victory in the women's 100-meter final in Paris. The British singer, Adele, connected her fans by streaming the race live during her concert in Munich. That's the latest BBC News.
So, how did that happen?
Well, actually, that's a really important question.
The Juventus were essentially enemies. That is, of course, an allegation that is very bad.
Everybody has a different definition of what the problem is.
Let's remember the background of all this.
Hello, I'm Claire Graham. Welcome to The Explanation from the BBC World Service, where we ask the big questions and try to get you the answers.
Haiti is a country that doesn't manufacture weapons, yet its people are living in a state of terror, flooded with guns and gangs.
They are one of the most effective weapons in this country. Cheap, mass-produced drones being used to deadly effect.
Ban on target. Shootazong's gun factory in Cebu has a thriving trade. It produces about 20,000 pistols and shotguns every year. 85% of them are sold abroad.
The princess comes straight down to business, publicly endorsing the Red Cross campaign for a worldwide ban on landmines.
We should focus our attention on this issue.
Welcome to The Explanation, the BBC's defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale. Thanks for your time. Jonathan, some will say that uncertainty and conflict drives the sale of arms. Is that a fair assessment? Is it a catch-22?
I think that is a fair assessment. I think that the reason why more countries are spending more on defence at the you look at, for example, India, Pakistan, they spend a lot of their budget on defence because of their concerns about what the other is doing and the threat that they're getting. So that conflict, but also uncertainty about what might happen, is a main driver of countries investing in defence, increasing exports, increasing their own arms industry. So if you look across the top 5 military spenders, well, it's US, followed by China, Russia, then India, then Saudi Arabia. The USA is clearly the biggest spender, more than $900 billion a year it spends on its defence, and if you compare that to the second place military spender, that's China, that's under $300 billion, so the US spending 3 times more. And then if you look at exports, again it is America that is exporting the most, followed by France, Russia, China and Germany. Again, US by far the largest exporter, accounting for 42% of the global arms trade. And then below that, imports, the countries that import the most military equipment, that would be India, followed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Ukraine, and then Pakistan. India accounts, which is the largest one, for about 10% of the global arms imports. So most of these figures come from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI for short, which keeps tabs on the global arms trade. And I have to say that not everything is registered. So, for example, Iran does not publish what it exports. We know that it exports missiles to groups and military technologies such as Hezbollah. It has been accused of doing that to Hamas. It's been accused of supplying the Houthis in Yemen with military equipment and military hardware, military know-how too. So not everything is registered, but that which is registered is more than $100 billion in terms of exports.
Where are you seeing the emerging markets?
If you think of 10 years ago, NATO, and there are now 32 members of the NATO Defence Alliance, only 4 of those countries are spending 2% of their national income, their GDP, on defence. Now the number is 23, and that is because of what has happened with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. A British warship in northern Norway on exercise with NATO allies. Making their military presence known to a nearby neighbour. Russia's always been on the radar, but more so since its invasion of Ukraine. I think you can then move to India. India is a rising power. It is stepping up its own defence expenditure significantly. It used to get most of its defence exports from Russia, but Russia, of course, is spending more of its resources in Ukraine. So India turning to other countries, principally France, which is providing a lot of military hardware, fighter jets, to India. And then look further east, if you go to the Indo-Pacific, you will see a number of countries like South Korea, Japan, Australia stepping up its defence expenditure and increasing imports of defence equipment, particularly from the US. And that is because of the concerns about China. And China is a growing military power. There are concerns about what China might do with Taiwan, whether they could attack Taiwan at some stage in the future. China is building the size of the entire British Royal Navy, their fleet, every 2 years. They are a massive military power.
A pact of old democracies coming together to counter a new and growing adversary, China.
Australia and the United Kingdom are two Americans most forward and capable allies. Our common values are a shared vision for a peaceful and prosperous future, uniting us all across the Atlantic and Pacific.
The main announcement here was an agreement to build Australia nuclear-powered but not nuclear-armed submarines, built in shipyards in the UK and Australia over the next 20 years. It's expected to create thousands of jobs in the UK.
So they are dependent on Western nations to continue their arms trade. True to of South Korea, but a lot of these countries that are facing rising threats also realise they have to produce their own weapons too. They have to have their own arms industry, what's called a sovereign capability, to make sure that they can keep those weapons flowing. And that's clearly a problem for Ukraine because a lot of its factories have been hit and destroyed. Half its electrical grid is out. It is completely reliant on the West.
What kind of weapons are being delivered?
Well, it's across the board, from crowd control munitions such as tear gas, all the way up to fast jets, air defense systems, long-range weapons, and drones, of course. A lot of money being spent on drones. But also, I think you're going to think of software and tech, because what militaries are trying to do now is what they call speed up the kill chain. So that means as soon as they identify a target, making a decision as soon as they can to hit that target, and software, computer programs help them do that.
Jonathan, are there any rules about who can sell to who?
Well, there are rules. Countries like the UK, like the US, would have licenses issued to countries that you can export to. It's a grey area because the UK, for example, still exports to countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, which have been accused of breaking international humanitarian law in the past, and yet still supply those weapons. So there is some oversight in democratic countries about what you can export. There is not that much transparency.
When you look at the links between arms companies, can you identify clear geopolitical ties?
I think it's increasingly more difficult to identify political ties in the sense of arms exports aren't just one country simply exporting to another. What the large arms companies do, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, which was British Aerospace, as examples, is they set up subsidiaries in other countries. So if you look at one example, the F-35 jet, now that is an American made, designed, developed fighter jet, the latest 5th generation fighter jet, which a lot of countries are buying. Parts of it are made elsewhere in the world. So, for example, the tail section of that jet is made in the UK, but it is under contract to Lockheed Martin, the American company which is overall in charge. So, if a country wanted to introduce an arms embargo, it would be very difficult for them to do that. So, for example, the Dutch Parliament wanted to suspend arms sales to Israel because of what's happening in Gaza. That focused on F-35 jets again. The Netherlands has warehouses with some of the components of the F-35, and it was concerned that that would go to Israel. There was a court ruling that upheld the Parliament's decision, but that is being appealed by the Dutch government. So those arms exports have not been stopped, even though the Dutch Parliament asked them to be stopped.
This is the explanation from the BBC World Service. I'm Claire Graham, and I'm asking which countries supply weapons and which countries buy them, with the BBC's defence correspondent Jonathan Beale.
So I've covered the war in Ukraine quite a lot, and there are a lot of countries that publicly state they are supplying weapons to Ukraine. But there are also quite a lot of countries that do not want to publicise the fact that they are supplying weapons to Ukraine. So, for example, I was once in the field with a Ukrainian unit that was using what's called Grad rockets, a rocket launcher, and they were running low. They used most of their own Grad supplies. They've had some from Eastern Europe to boost their munitions, but also the West has been scouring the market across the world trying to get these weapons, Grad rockets, for Ukraine. And one of the commanders I met told me that the weapons, the Grad rockets they were using at that time, they weren't Grad rockets, they were very similar to it, were from Pakistan. Pakistan has denied them supplying Ukraine with weapons, but there was evidence on the ground that they have been supplying weapons. There's also what Turkey's been doing. So Turkey, for example, has given Ukraine some weapons. It also has a close relationship, Erdogan and Putin. So Turkey is, I'd call it, anomaly in NATO. It tends to have good relations with lots of countries which may be seen as pariahs by most of their allies. Turkey too has not publicised all the munitions it's given to Ukraine because I don't think it wants a political fallout. So, for example, I know that Turkey has supplied Ukraine with cluster munitions even before the US supplied Ukraine with cluster munitions, but didn't publicise it. So there are countries that provide weapons to countries but don't want to publicise it, and for that reason, you might be surprised that they do it, but it is happening.
Saudi Air Force Tornado jets, sold by Britain, were fitted to carry cluster bombs. The Saudis say they don't use British cluster bombs as they've all expired. Whitehall officials say the Saudis have now destroyed their British stocks, and yet evidence of their use has been found on the ground in Yemen.
I think people's ears do prick up mostly in democratic countries where these concerns are raised. And I think that happened with the UK when it was supplying Saudi Arabia with weapons, and those weapons were controversially being used against Houthis in Yemen, and civilians were being killed. It is sometimes difficult to work out whether a specific country provided a specific weapon that caused civilian casualties, but there are people who are weapons experts who can tell us where those weapons came from a part that may have been left, a serial number that is still intact on the ground, who supplied that weapon. So those concerns certainly have gone back to the West. The pressure has been felt to the West, and again, to use that example of British munitions used against the Houthis in Saudi Arabia, which eventually led to a challenge in the High Court, which temporarily suspended arms sales, but which were then resumed. So that political pressure does happen. But overall, it is very, very hard to force a country to stop providing weapons unless there is enough political pressure in the country. And I think the lack of transparency makes that really more difficult for populations to rise up and say, you've got to stop this.
What happens, Jonathan, when you have weapons that are smuggled into a country to help in a conflict or a war, and then the war ends? How is that managed in the aftermath?
I think the answer is with difficulty. I think if you look back to when Russia was in Afghanistan, the US supplied jihadi groups with Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. And then, of course, Russia pulled out. The US went in, and they were worried about what would happen to those Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. So what we had was essentially special forces going on the ground, looking for those weapons, and then buying with hard cash. Special forces going in, giving warlords essentially cash in exchange for the return of those Stinger missiles. It is a huge problem. When you supply a country with weapons, you are not sure as to where they may end up.
And Jonathan, just to finish, I mean, would economies in the West be able to survive without an arms trade?
The arms trade employs millions of people across the globe. It is a massive employer. In America, for example, senators campaign to get an arms factory in their constituency, in their region, in their district, because they know it is a job creator. Not necessarily because they think it is the most important thing for the defence of their country. So that there's no doubt that economics is a driver. You can't say it black and white though. There are clearly geopolitical concerns that drive government to supply countries with weapons. And it is a bit of a murky world. There is self-interest, and there's also the other concern, which is that if a country stops supplying another country with weapons because of human rights concerns, what happens then? What happens in that vacuum? And the answer is there will be another country that will supply that nation with weapons. So do you deprive your own economy of the jobs and the factories that could boost the economy and allow another country to benefit? And it may be a country that has the same values on paper as you do. It may be another Western democratic country has decided that the political risk is worth taking and the economic risk outweighs the political risk. So, as I say, not a black and white issue, a lot of considerations, And it is a little bit murky. It is something that makes a lot of people uneasy. But I think we've got to accept the fact that there is an arms trade. That arms trade is growing. It is likely to grow even more with the levels of uncertainty, the insecurity being felt right across the globe now because of, let's be honest, autocratic countries that are rattling the saber. And for that reason, this will continue. These exports will continue, these imports will continue, but there may be a price further down the line.
Thanks to my guest, Jonathan Beale. You've been listening to The Explanation from the BBC World Service with me, Claire Graham.
Hello and welcome to Sporting Witness with me, Marlene Casey. Today I'm taking you back to 1970s New York, to the birthplace of breaking, the dance movement that has its debut as an Olympic sport in Paris 2024. In 1984, big sporting names were gathering on 56th Street in New York. They were filming a salute to athletes for that summer's Olympics in LA. Getting ready to perform were 8 young women, the New York City Breakers, who had recently found themselves at the heart of breakdancing as a global phenomenon. With them was Michael Holman, creator of the group.
I'll never forget being backstage thinking, wait a second, we're performing for the Olympics. What we do should be in the Olympics.
40 years later, Holman's vision has been realized. In 2024, breakdancing, also known as breaking, debuts as an Olympic sport in Paris. It's been a long journey, and Holman has played a key role. His story with the sport began when he moved to New York as a graduate in the late 1970s. He had come to work as a banker on Wall Street, but instead, he was soon drawn to an emerging counterculture in the city.
Trains would roll in with graffiti burners covering the cars, covering the windows in multiple colors made in spray paint, teasers about a culture, about a subculture that would later on be called hip-hop.
I believe as youngsters, we're trying to find expression, maybe the hard times, social upheaval.
It's all these young kids, young artists that come together and just spray their messages.
It was at a back-to-school neighborhood party co-hosted by then-teenager DJ Kool Herc in an apartment building's community room in the Bronx, New York, that breaking was said to have started in 1973. Breakers, or B-boys and B-girls as they're called, show off intricate footwork to the beats and breaks of music. But it's also a show of athleticism. Moves can include spinning on your head or supporting your body weight on one hand while freezing your legs in the air. In the 70s, it wasn't as extravagant as it is now, taking off more and more at parties and so-called park jams.
Those park jams were truly the genesis of hip-hop culture. Without those park jams, which were basically a replacement of discos, but in the park and at night.
Here in the South Bronx Project is where it all started. DJs would plug their sound systems into the street lamps and jam away in the streets and parks. In those early days, it was a black and Hispanic thing, and it was by all accounts wicked.
Get a lamp pole, open it up, and stick the plug in and get the equipment cranked up and start piping.
That was where the break dancers would get down in the park.
Some people have their ballet, their opera music, and their whatever. You know, we have our art, we have our music, and we have our dance. This is a subculture.
Holman remembers seeing one of these park jams in the Bronx firsthand.
You could hear, coming from the projects, wafting these bass beats. And we walk in between these buildings, and there in front of us is a sea of, must be about 1,000 kids, mostly boys, mostly black, and they're all dancing and getting down. The scene is wild. These are songs that are compelling. They don't inspire you to get up on the dance floor. They literally force you onto the dance.
Holman began both making films about breaking and managing B-boys, arranging performances for them at New York City clubs downtown.
But I really want my friends, this audience, my downtown compatriots, I want them to see what this is really about. It's really about battling.
B-boys and their crews competing against each other was popular at park jams, where people gathered around breakers in circles or ciphers, and the loudness of crowd reactions sometimes marked clear winners. It made sense to Holman to bring this energy into performances downtown too. And at the first of these battles, he encountered a group who made it clear that what breakers were capable of went beyond just dancing.
This other crew, the Floor Masters, they're something else. Their moves were not simple break moves, they were power moves. They were athletes.
He went up to the leader of the Floor Masters.
And I said, I've got an idea. I want to strip away your crew, get rid of all the weaker dancers, go and raid other breakdance crews around the city for their power breakers and invite them to be part of this new all-star, superstar crew.
The group formed in 1982. They were called the New York City Breakers, and within days, they were big, with one of their very first gigs on national television.
It was just like a rocket in outer space from there. Yes, you can be on this TV show. Yes, you can write this book. Yes, you can perform here. Yes, it was yes, yes, yes. The country was so excited by this new movement of dance, and really it was breaking.
It was only just over a year later, in 1984, that the crew was performing at the salute for the upcoming LA Olympic Games.
So I got a piece of paper from somewhere, a big piece of cardboard actually, and a pen. Let's see if I can find it. Hang on a sec. It's gotta be right here. Wait, here. Where is it? Okay, here it is. So I wrote this thing that says, a proclamation that says, "We, the New York City Breakers, see the Olympic Games as our future. We see breakdancing as a future Olympic sport and ourselves as pioneers in making this dream a reality." Signed by all the New York City Breakers.
He also outlined rules for breaking competitions.
And then it breaks down like what you would do: required moves, body waves, floats, locks, popping, worming.
Despite the immediate success, the New York City Breakers experienced a decline in popularity after the mid-1980s as trends moved on. Media attention slowed down, but breaking started making strides as a competitive sport. New crews and competitions sprung up around the world. Breaking such its roots as a sport from the Bronx to places as far away as Seoul or Nairobi. In 1990, the first Battle of the Year, often called the World Cup of B-Boying, was hosted in Germany, where crews from around the world compete. Judging criteria for such competitions look at artistry and technicality, things like theme, music, synchronicity, footwork, power moves. As it's matured as a sport, it's also built an enduring appeal with younger audiences, something that helped its supporters make the case for it as an Olympic sport. In a major milestone, breaking had its first Olympic debut at the Youth Olympics in Buenos Aires in 2018. And then it was announced as an official sport for the 2024 Paris Olympics.
Breaking, a competitive form of breakdancing, has been confirmed as part of the final lineup for the Paris Olympics. It'll join Saudi.
Those same power moves that were pioneered by the Floor Masters and then who became the New York City Breakers are the genesis and the foundation of breaking in the Olympics.
Sadly for fans of the sport, Paris will not only be breaking's first Olympics, but for now, also its last. In 2028, when the Olympic Games return to Los Angeles, cricket and flag football will be amongst new events, but breaking was not chosen by the city's committee.
There has to be a little bit of a, sobering feeling to that, a little bit of disappointment and letdown.
For Michael, the LA decision feels especially heavy when looking back on just how far breaking has come since the 1970s.
And it started with poor and working class kids in the Bronx who had nothing. The expression that they needed to say was, "Look at me. Do not ignore me because I'm poor or working class. I'm something. I'm somebody. I have something to say. And I have something beautiful to say." They have changed the world. They created a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they are giants. And I feel emotional right now telling you this, because I know it's true, because I was there and I saw this whole thing happen before my eyes.
Michael Holman's once far-fetched seeming Olympic dream for breaking is now reality. He'll be at the Games as part of the US team's legacy committee, but he also has a new vision.
It won't be in the Olympics again in 2028, but maybe, too bad for the Olympics. Maybe it's just going to become as big as the World Cup. 'Cause, I can dream, can't I?
Michael Holman and that edition of Sporting Witness. It was presented by me, Marlene Kezavia, and it was a Whistledown production for the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, where Susan Wilton is investigating a $6 billion gold mining stunning scam, the world's largest gold hoax, which devastated communities. We lost everything, and to date, no one has been brought to justice.
Somebody knows more than we know.
The $6 billion gold scam at bbcworldservice.com or wherever you get your BBC podcasts. In 30 minutes, the documentary.
30 years ago, the Romero Vasquez sisters in La Patrona, Veracruz threw groceries onto a moving train to help migrants. We explore how that small act of kindness from Las Patronas has grown into a lifeline for thousands.
The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
This is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. Huge crowds returned to Venezuela's streets to dispute President Maduro's claim of election victory.
There was a lot of fear to come today. There's been a lot of violent repression. The police is going after them house by house. We have trains that are hidden.
More British cities see anti-immigrant protests descend into riots. Explosions in Israel's night sky as Hezbollah says it launched dozens of rockets over the northern border.
Here's the danger. If there are significant civilian casualties as a result of these attacks, Israel will feel compelled to retaliate.
Golden Olympic history is made both for the island of Dominica and St. Lucia. And Walk This Way No More.
The vocal cords are two tiny little bits of tissue that sit in the middle of the neck, and they need to be very supple and pliable to vibrate. And if there is a scar, then they lose their pliability, they lose their suppleness.
Frontman Steven Tyler's vocal injury means the end of the road for Aerosmith.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has promised maximum punishment for anti-government demonstrators who say his re-election was rigged. Mr. Maduro told supporters that about 2,000 people had been detained since the vote a week ago. At a mass rally earlier, the opposition leader Maria Corina Machado said the government had lost all legitimacy.
We will not be provoked. Violence is there because it's the only option they have left. We will not respond to any provocations. We won't attack. The world knows they intend to forcefully withhold the result. 6 days later, they haven't handed over a single record. The period has expired and no pseudo-legal maneuver can cover up the truth. The truth is in our tallies and the facts are in our hearts.
Far-right demonstrations have descended into violence in towns and cities across England and Northern Ireland. More than 80 people were arrested on Saturday during the anti-immigration unrest, which was initially sparked by the fatal stabbing of 3 young girls earlier in the week. Clashes continued into the night in Liverpool, with fireworks thrown and police wearing riot gear. The British Home Secretary Yvette Cooper warned that any criminal acts will not go unpunished.
Anyone who gets involved in criminal disorder, violent thuggery on our streets will have to pay the price, and they should expect there to be arrests, prosecutions, penalties, and the full force of the law, including imprisonment, travel bans, and more, because it's really important that communities can feel safe on the streets, and there are consequences for breaking the law.
The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah says it's launched dozens of rockets into northern Israel. It says the attack was in retaliation for Israeli strikes in 2 villages in Lebanon earlier on Sunday. Israel's military said most of the rockets were intercepted. Tension is high in the region since Wednesday's killings of the Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah's military chief. Nigerian security forces have fired live bullets and tear gas at protesters in the capital Abuja on the 3rd day of demonstrations over a cost of living crisis. People gathered at a stadium but were blocked by police as they headed towards government offices. At least 7 people have died in nationwide unrest. The demonstrators, including these 2, are complaining about price rises.
What kind of nation do we want for our children? We are not doing this for ourselves, but we are doing this for our children. We are doing this for tomorrow. We are doing it for the betterment of Nigeria. You can't tell us not to protest.
We're here until we have a request resolved. That's why we're here. It's for 10 days, and it might extend more than 10 days if we do not get an answer.
World news from the BBC. Reports from eastern Congo say M23 rebels have taken control of a large town close to the border with Uganda. The reported seizure on Saturday of Nyamulilima without any fighting came on the same day that a month-long humanitarian truce was due to expire. Residents and a local pro-government militia withdrew as the rebels arrived. State media in North Korea say the Russian President Vladimir Putin has offered to send aid to areas hit hard by heavy rain. Thousands of North Korean homes have been flooded in recent days. Mr. Putin reportedly said he was willing to provide immediate support. Scientists say the world's biggest iceberg is stuck in a giant rotating water column and is spinning on the spot in the Southern Ocean. The iceberg is more than twice the size of Greater London. It initially broke away from the Antarctic Peninsula in the 1980s before becoming lodged on the bed of the Weddell Sea. At the Paris Olympics, the St. Lucian sprinter Julian Alfred has raced to victory in the women's 100-meter final. The BBC's commentary team watched her secure the Caribbean islands' first ever medal.
Away first time, Clayton gets an excellent start. Richardson gets left a little bit. It's Julian Alfred who's out in front, and Julian Alfred's got this to win. Julian Alfred is storming away. She's going to win the Olympic title. Alfred reigns supreme. 10:72. St. Lucia has a gold medal.
Elsewhere at the Games, Ryan Crouser of the United States won an unprecedented third consecutive Olympic title in the shot put. Also, Ukraine have claimed their first gold in Paris after their fencers triumphed in the women's sabre team competition. That's the latest BBC World News.
Hello, this is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. We begin in Venezuela, where anger is growing over last week's disputed elections. Thousands of people have taken to the streets in Caracas chanting "Freedom" and "We are not afraid." The crowds waved flags and sang the national anthem, while the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado,